Retsu Unohana, formerly known as Yachiru Unohana, the first captain of the 11th Division and the first Kenpachi, was seemingly the epitome and personification of the loneliness of strength. After ages of feeling as if she had culled the world of anyone capable of standing up to her, she felt like she had reached the peak, so disillusioned with the monotonous slog her life had become and so lost in her own head that in the desolation of a broken battlefield, she was incapable of noticing a pile of bodies stacking up next to her. She was abruptly snapped out of this doldrum, however, when she glanced towards that heap of corpses and saw a young boy, more closely resembling a rabid animal than anything else. Little did she know that the boy was suffering through the exact same thing as her. An inability to find an opponent worthy of his strength and a resultant disillusionment with life. And yet, when the two exchanged blows, each combatant found themselves feeling something for the first time and elated as a result. They danced, they fought, they communicated. Unohana was the weaker, but it was still a close bout, and Kenpachi was so enraptured by it that he never wanted it to end. And so he ensured this internally by subconsciously handicapping himself, putting a self-imposed ceiling on his self-comprehension and potential to chain and restrict his power, lowering his own level so as to not kill Unohana here in the past, nor others in the present, so that he would never be at risk of losing this feeling. Kenpachi here shows a fear of the finite. He loves battle, he loves the feelings it brings, and he loves his life for having the capacity to allow him to experience this, and more than anything, he does not want it to end. He doesn't want to lose this feeling. And so he hangs on. He cannot let go. He loves life and he loves fighting, and in order to experience both to their utmost, he must keep winning. But this paradox of a man loves so hard that his fear of losing that love deprives him of rediscovering it with others through honest expression. Unohana regretted not being strong enough to prevent this from happening, but nonetheless, a special relationship was struck here between two kindred souls sharing a passion for battle. Kenpachi restricted himself in order to forever enjoy fighting, and Unohana learned to heal to forever enjoy it, to heal herself and others to allow this dance to go on forever. Again, avoiding confronting the finite. But she admits that prioritized above all of that was her use of healing in their final fight to allow Kenpachi to move past his fear, to understand himself and fight with freedom for the first time. So Unohana understands that there was nothing more important in her life than nurturing him and helping him understand himself and be liberated. And to do this, she is happy to sacrifice herself. In this story where understanding and communication come through battle, Unohana had to die to allow for her partner to live. And she pushes, urges him on, with love and terror, to find the answer beyond as she rectifies her regrets with reckless abandon. And in the defining moment, she feels that love and is freed from everything just as he is when he impales her in an embrace. For Kenpachi, Unohana was the first person to teach him joy. For Unohana, Kenpachi was the only man to bring her joy. The two are soulmates, two souls fated to meet and inexorably change one another's lives, and within the cavalcade of complexions to the swirling tempest of their relationship, within the eye of the storm, there is serenity. There are seemingly infinite feelings attached to their bond, and in a way it reminds me of something Griffith thought about Guts in Berserk's Golden Age arc. About how when he thinks of the latter, he feels a violent swirl of emotions for which none are definite, but all are implied. However, despite the sentiment being clear, to me there are some definite, concrete elements to this connection between Unohana and Kenpachi that further strengthens it. To put forth another example, I actually liken their relationship to the one between the boss and Naked Snake in Metal Gear Solid 3. Complex, multifaceted, conflicting, strong, and passionate, and above all, containing clear characteristics of mother and son. Now, I don't necessarily in this context believe that for Unohana and Kenpachi, feelings of mother and son and feelings of romantic love can't coexist, and I think it's important to note that while I can't say that I personally interpret it this way, there is very much evidence of a lustful, naked, potentially Freudian element to the fight here as these two souls lay everything bare and ascend with ecstasy. There are definite romantic connotations to be read from their final embrace and Unohana's final line about Kenpachi too. But to me, above all, this fight is a dynamic between a mother and her surrogate son, who are soulmates in that way, potentially among others. Again, no mutual exclusivity. Now, I tweeted about this and got an interesting amount of pushback that I felt was unexpected because I don't think this interpretation is super radical or reading extremely deep into subtext at all. Of course, their bond is so intimate and profound and layered that no descriptor can properly do it full justice. I think it's very fair to say that a bond this deep defies description and that no descriptors for it are mutually exclusive. However, in spite of that, I think dismissing what are in my opinion very clear allusions to motherhood and femininity in the presentation and dialogue here is dismissing an essential layer of the dynamic, and most pertinently, of Unohana as a character. So yes, they share a bond for which the intimacy is so profound that it defies description, but at the same time, to say that it doesn't contain elements of motherhood to me is strange, because the parallels are clear and easy to acknowledge even if one doesn't agree. So while I do think that the bond defies description, I also think it's rather important to specify the allusions to Unohana's motherhood and the pain and beauty that it represents. This section of Bleach is undoubtedly about two lonely souls in love with battle and is also very clear about the fervent passion Unohana feels at the prospect of polishing this raw gem and lifting Kenpachi up to reveal his full potential. But it's more than that. With regards to the why, firstly, it goes without saying that Unohana is a very maternal figure throughout the story up until this point. Not necessarily to Kenpachi, but to everyone. It's her energy and presence in the story. She is stern and not to be messed with, and she demands respect in that way, along with her reputation and strength being a big part of the reason that others cede to her. But to me, the most significant of all is that she is a comforting presence, with gentle expressions full of compassion and sentiment, and her then current occupation as a healer taking precedence. And this motherly element to her transfers over to the Kenpachi dynamic. She is terrifying and fearsome in this bout, and she feels this joyous release. And it is for herself, but most of all, it is all done for the purpose of giving her life and everything that she is just for Kenpachi to achieve the greatest happiness and live free. To open up the wound to provide the potential for him to learn, grow, mature, and elevate to the heights of the human experience. And of course, to sacrifice oneself for one's child is something that any parent would do. It's something that some would argue every parent does do when committing to becoming a parent in the first place. It is a pure expression of love to help one's child succeed, to nurture them with warmth and affection, but tough love as well to promote their growth and maturation for their own sake. So Unohana gives herself wholly to allowing Kenpachi, her son, to thrive and mature, to self-actualize and understand himself, to be happy. And that is a parent's greatest wish. Now, of course, this self-sacrifice and nurturing alone doesn't make this motherly, as plenty of other relationships have nurture and don't necessitate motherhood. So while I do think that these elements alone are enough to make this interpretation valid, let's strengthen the interpretation. Now, upon seeing Unohana's blood attacks, I immediately drew a parallel between her and the blood techniques used by Lady Maria during her boss fight in Bloodborne. And at the time, this was just an aesthetic note, nothing more, but the Bloodborne comparison turned out to be incredibly apt. Because as stated by Honeybat in their brilliant video, which is linked in the description, Bloodborne, along with being the most fascinating, horrifying world that you can find in video games with some of the richest and most extensive lore, is an allegorical work fixated on motherhood and femininity in all of its facets. The warm, the affectionate, the nurturing, and the ugly, the gross, and the painful. The allusions to blood throughout, the nature of rebirth throughout the story and the world, the great ones and their strife, the ugliness and pregnancy everywhere. Bloodborne is about many things, and chief among them is femininity and motherhood, the visceral trials and suffering of what it means to be a woman. Now, I'm not trying to say that Bleach goes nearly as deep with this as Bloodborne does, but the method through which these themes are communicated with Unohana is very similar to how Bloodborne does it. We have this woman who met a young boy, challenged him, and introduced him to the world through that challenge. It's outright stated that Kenpachi wasn't living before this, so in a sense, he experienced a birth into the world here, one of viscerality and blood, just like the way that a literal baby is born. Harshly thrown into the world, soaked in blood, introduced through and subsequently reared by a mother. Kenpachi was obviously never in Unohana's womb, but the characteristics through which she helped him come into the world and be his own person are very similar. Physically, physiologically, aesthetically, and spiritually. Kenpachi then spent ages and ages of fruitless searching for answers in the doldrums of his mind, with certain challenges opening his eyes to the potential of that ecstasy, but never really reaching that point, never taking off the handicap, before the challenge of Yuha made it so that he could no longer tread water. For the sake of the survival of the Soul Society, he needed to unlock the limits of his potential, and in so doing, unlock himself. In a sense, he needed a rebirth. And what happens during the fight that manifests as this rebirth occurs? Unohana is his adversary and she activates her Bankai, the deepest essence of her soul, Minazuki. Minazuki roughly translates to the end of all, which ties to Unohana's essence through alluding to her monstrous, battle-crazy nature that would end all opponents that faced her prior to her own awakening. But this name in this moment also refers to her end and death right here and right now in this fight for the purpose of helping Kenpachi. The actual manifestation of her Bankai involves drawing her own blood, bringing forth a river of blood in the defining moment of the fight, where Kenpachi takes on her challenge at her toughest and overcomes it through sheer force of will, and through a loving, healing hand. As both break down and heal up, turned into skeletons and nurtured back to life, Kenpachi finally reaches the light beyond. But the moment that ushers him into this epiphany is that visceral, bloody Bankai. Unohana opens him up to the world here, and he experiences a second birth in a frenzy of blood, just like the way a baby is born to their mother, and spiritually reminiscent of the way a parent would send their child off to adulthood. And as the two share an embrace of death, Unohana reflects on the defining moment of motherhood between the two, where upon realizing her indescribable bond to this boy, she not only named him, but bestowed upon him her own name as she birthed him into the world, as parents do for their children's surnames and at times for their first or middle names. This child is the one worthy of the name Kenpachi. Kenpachi would then come to name his Zanpakuto, his partner and soul, and in a way, his own daughter, after the only person he ever admired, Yachiru, as a father would name a daughter after his mother. And the two would be forever linked, their bond strengthened by the sheer emotionality, profundity, and intimacy contained within that name. Not to mention, one of the most striking and defining dynamics in the series is the one between Ichigo and Kenpachi. Two men cut from the same cloth going through parallel journeys of self-actualization and understanding after their paths converge. There are many parallels between the two. Their yearning for battle for differing reasons, their deeply rooted fears, even their fights throughout the series that dovetail to reflect one another in a mirror. And key amongst those elements is that both Ichigo and Kenpachi are guided through their journey by two women in spirit. Masaki for Ichigo and Unohana for Kenpachi. Two warm, tough, motherly influences who take each of their hands and guide them through life to help them grow and understand themselves, both of whom sacrifice their lives for their child. Two parents helping their children from within and beyond the realms of life, their love expanding beyond any boundaries. Unohana is a magnificent character, one who clearly has something hidden behind the pained expressions early on, but for whom the execution of her reveal is achieved with such heart and soul and love that it feels like a fight dropped down upon us from the heavens as we learn about who she is and how her and Kenpachi are so intimately tied in the most efficient and rich way. And with such a complex relationship and such a layered character, especially with the context of a story as interpretive as Bleach, there are naturally going to be tons of interpretations. I believe that they're clear soulmates, and soulmates need not be romantic, but as I said earlier, I also think that they have a bond so deep that descriptors don't do it justice and are quite arbitrary a lot of the time. While not completely buying into it myself, I get the romantic angle, and there are notes of that present without a doubt. There are surely lots of other ways to interpret it too. Fated rivals, star-crossed partners tied by the blood-red thread of fate, etc. And the most valid way to interpret this relationship is likely through a mix of all of the above. However, to me, the character of Unohana and the concept of femininity and especially motherhood are so intertwined that to dismiss this sort of idea is to dismiss a substantial part of her character. From the beginning, she cuts that sort of figure until layers of love, nurture, blood, violence, and complexity are added through her defining relationship with Kenpachi, who is the archetypal lost, wayward son until she guides him home. Due to all of this and more, overall I just can't think of a more appropriate way to describe Unohana than as a mother, encapsulating all of the pain, nurture, conflict, viscerality, and love that motherhood represents. Many thanks for watching.
I was mistress to you when you needed love. I was wife to you when you needed understanding. But first and before all, I was mother. I have known you like no other. So I love you like no other. I will guide you through it. But at its end is where you must leave me. At its end is where you will find the peace that eludes you. And at its end lies the answer you refuse to see.